Good morning. How you doing? Well, thank you guys for being here this morning. Please pray for Pastor Tony. Keep him in your thoughts and prayers. He's still sick. But Wednesday it was, whenever I heard that he had pneumonia and the flu, I thought I should probably text him and tell him that I'll cover Sunday. So that's good there. What we've been talking about this series is 24, and it's the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. And so I was thinking in my, half a week to prepare for this morning, I thought, what do I think is most important about this series? And what I came up with was that I think that in order for the last 24 hours of Jesus' life to even be significant, the one thing that would have to be true is that Jesus is who he says he was. That's got to be, because if Jesus is not who he says he was, then what does it matter? Any of the hours of his life. He was just a carpenter, or probably more accurately, stonemason from Nazareth. So what I want to talk about this morning is how we can be absolutely certain that Jesus is who he says he is. Does that sound good? Good. So in order to do that, we're going to look at some of the prophecies in the Old Testament concerning the Messiah, otherwise known as messianic prophecies. So if you look at, I know you guys have a copy of this by your nightstand, everybody, but it's J. Barton Payne's Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecy. So I know it's all pages are probably ripped out because you've been reading it so much, but this encyclopedia says that there are 8,362 predictive verses in the Bible, verses that predict something. It's predictive in nature. 1,817 specific verses, so a specific prediction about a specific event or person or circumstance. Over 737 different matters. So there's a lot that the Bible has to say about things that hadn't happened yet. All right? There's a lot of prophecy, a lot of stuff involved. But there are only, of those thousands of predictive verses, there are 300 messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. In other words, there are 300 verses about the coming Savior, the coming Messiah that is going to restore Israel, remove them from oppression and out from under other authority. And we can be sure that these things are not like altered, right? Because the messianic prophecies back in the day were things looking forward at a coming Messiah. We know that we know who Messiah is, right? That's kind of the reason that we're all here today together. It's Jesus. And if that's new to you, then praise the Lord. Tell somebody after this message and we'll tell you more. So Jesus is Messiah. That's us looking in hindsight, but for them it was predictive. It was a prophecy. And we can be sure that the prophecies in the Old Testament were not, configured and reworded and edited so that they would fit Jesus' life. We know that it wasn't like Jesus did these things and then so somebody came over here and wrote them down and then put a date that was, 1,000 years previous and then somebody bought that. That's not how it works. Actually, the Hebrew Bible, or our Old Testament, it was converted to Greek in 270 BC. It's called the Septuagint. And Septuagint just means 70. 70 Jewish scholars sat down and converted the whole Hebrew text into Greek. And that was in black and white, circulated, that's a matter of secular history. You can look in an encyclopedia and find that date. So that means that the entire Hebrew Bible, the entire Old Testament, was printed in Greek in 270 BC. That was almost 300 years before Jesus ever stepped on the scene. So that's a fact. And that's not just some Bible teacher telling you that. That's a matter of secular history that you can look up in any library. So we're going to look at some messianic prophecies today. And I wanted to look at one in particular first that I just think this is like my favorite one. But first, to get my water. Okay, one of my favorite prophecies is in Daniel 9. It's called the 70 weeks prophecy. Anybody ever heard the 70 weeks prophecy? Good. I taught on the 70 weeks prophecy once on this stage. So, some of you definitely have. So Daniel, in Daniel chapter 9, is praying, and he gets an encounter with an angel, and this angel tells him in 9:24, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall, even in troublesome times. Okay, so in a nutshell, Daniel gets a vision from this angel. This angel tells him that there are 70 weeks until the end. 70 weeks until the sin is paid for, until it's wiped clean, everlasting righteousness comes in. There's 70 weeks. And until the Messiah comes, there are 62 weeks and 7 weeks. So let's do a little math here. Nobody freak out. We're going to make this super easy, okay? Let's start with the easy one. $69, that's right. 62 weeks plus 7 weeks equals 69 weeks. Okay, so 69 weeks, that's about a year and a half, right? So back when Daniel was written, in hundreds of years before Jesus came on the scene, it was going to be a year and a half before the end. But we look back and we think, well, that isn't really right because that doesn't make any sense. Well, there's a reason why that doesn't make any sense. The term week for us means 7 days, right? It's a collection of days that is 7. There's a week of days in Jewish culture too, but there's also a week of weeks, 7 weeks, and then there's also a week of years, which would be 7 years. So this term specifically is talking about a week of 7 years. So let's take our 69 times 7 years. Anybody know it? Who pulled out their phone? 483 years. Okay? So 483 years until Messiah comes. Right? You following? Tracking? So, if you want to know how many days this is, it's 176,295 days. It's 483 years. Now, we have 2 different date points that we're looking for in this prophecy. The first one is the issuing of the decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and then Messiah coming, right? So that's our point A and point B. So point A, the issuing of the decree to rebuild and restore Jerusalem, we know that in Nehemiah chapter 2, Nehemiah went to King Artaxerxes and asked for permission to go and rebuild Jerusalem, which he was granted permission. So King Artaxerxes gave Nehemiah written documents saying that he could go and rebuild Jerusalem. Now we have a date for this. This is also a matter of secular history. The date that we have for the decree to rebuild Jerusalem is the Jewish month of Nisan 1. Nisan like the car. Nisan 1, 445 BC, or March 14th, 445 BC. Okay? So we know that this is the date that the decree to rebuild Jerusalem was issued. So we have a point A. Now, we're looking for point B. Now, since we have 20/20 vision, we know that Jesus is Messiah. So is there any point in the life and ministry of Jesus that he came into Jerusalem and presented himself as the prince or the Messiah or king? Yes, there is. In fact, there's a prophecy that is very well known, and it's Zechariah 9:9. Zechariah 9:9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So is there anybody in the New Testament that presented themselves in Jerusalem as king riding on a donkey? Right. A lot more nods for that one because it's the donkey. That's kind of memorable. So he comes in riding on a donkey. This is the triumphal entry. Now let's read about this triumphal entry. This is going to be in Luke chapter 19. Verse 35. Then they brought him, the donkey, to Jesus, and they threw their own clothes on the colt, and they set Jesus on him. And as he went, many spread their clothes on the road. Then, as he was now drawing near to the descent of Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works they had seen, saying, "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest." So here they're praising Jesus as he's riding in on this donkey, saying, "Blessed is the King. This is the King." They're remembering that prophecy that says your King comes to you riding on a donkey. And so whenever the Pharisees see this going on, they see Jesus riding on a donkey and these people calling out and saying, "Blessed is the King." The Pharisees said, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." They're saying they're blaspheming. Rebuke your disciples. And he answered and said to them, "I tell you that if these should keep silent, the stones would immediately cry out." He says, I can't do anything about it. If they stop, then the stones are going to rejoice. Because in the Old Testament, the prophecy is that Jerusalem will rejoice when their king comes to them on a donkey. So somebody's going to be rejoicing because God said it was going to happen. Whether it's the disciples or whether it's the rocks on the ground, somebody's rejoicing because God said it was going to happen. You can make a message out of that right there. So, we have a date for this triumphal entry also. It's a matter of secular history. The triumphal entry that is talked about in Luke 19 is Nisan 10, 32 AD, or April 6th, 32 AD. Okay, so what we're wanting to do here is, you guys have seen where we're going with this, right? We want to see if the prophecy in the Old Testament about Daniel's, 483 years until Messiah comes, which is 176,295 days, matches up with these point A and point B that we have here, right? So if you were to take from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, and you were to walk forward 176,295 days, which is how many days are in 483 years, you would come to April of 38 AD. Bump, bump, bump. So that was very anticlimactic, was it not? Oh, except I forgot that the Jewish calendar, they don't use 365-day years like we do. They use 360-day years. So if we were to take 69 times 7, which is 483, 483 times 360 equals, you guessed it, 173,880 days. Now, if we were to go from March 14th, 445 BC, and march forward 173,880 days, we would come to April 6th, 32 AD. To the day this prophecy was fulfilled. Are you kidding? Come on. To the day. You can't make that up. Especially because that was written, printed in black and white, before Jesus ever stepped on the scene by hundreds of years. So shoot, dog, that's something, I think. A little bit of redneck in me coming out, I guess. So what are the odds, right? That's what we're trying to answer here. What are the odds? What are the odds that somebody would fulfill this I think these are not, I think this is not odds at all. This is just very planned and specific, like the whole thing. But let's just take the donkey prophecy, right? Your king's going to come riding in on a donkey into Jerusalem. All right, so let's look at the probability of that. Okay, so we've got our first prophecy. We're going to look at 8 different prophecies here. So the first one is the donkey prophecy. What are the chances, what are the odds of somebody over the past 2,000 years would ride into Jerusalem presenting themselves as king on a donkey? I mean, I have no idea, but I'm going to say 1 in 100 would be very generous, wouldn't you say? I mean, very generous. Okay, so 1 in 100. What does that mean? That means that if I've got a jar of pennies, of 100 pennies, which I do, and I were to take one of these pennies out and then put an X on the back of it, and then I were to drop that penny back in the jar, shake it up so that it was evenly distributed, the chances of Aaron pulling out the penny with the X on it are 1 in 100. So he had a 1% chance of getting the penny. Right? Right. He had a 99% chance of failure. So that's a basic illustration for probability. So 1 in 100 for the donkey prophecy. Let's look at another prophecy. Psalm 41:9. Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. Who does this sound like? Judas, right? Jesus was betrayed by one of his friends who ate of his bread. This is talking about Judas. So let's see over the past 2,000 years, what are the chances that one person would be betrayed by one of their closest friends in the process of eating bread? Again, I have no idea, but I think that, if we said probably 1 in 1,000, right? Because of the bread thing, it's a little more specific. I put 2 ones. Look at that. Who does that? Okay? 1 in 1,000. So we had a 1 in 100. But let's get 1,000 pennies. This is 1,000 pennies. Can you believe that? I almost bought like this big jug for 1,000 pennies, and it was like, that's all it took. It would have been kind of silly if I had this big old, jug and it just filled at the bottom just a little bit. So we got 1,000 pennies here. So the chance of somebody fulfilling that prophecy would be like me putting an X on a penny and putting it in a jar like so, shaking it up so it's evenly distributed, and then seeing if Kyle can pick one penny out of 1,000 that has an X on it. Do you get it? That's so funny because Carrie did the exact same thing first service. That's right. So, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. Let's look at another prophecy. Zechariah 11:12. Then I said to them, if it seems good to you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them. And they weighed out as my wages 30 pieces of silver. Where does that ring a bell? Jesus was betrayed. Oh, That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So Judas traded Jesus' location and gave him up to the Pharisees for 30 pieces of silver. So how many people over the course of the past 2,000 years have been betrayed by one of their friends for 30 pieces of silver? Exactly. I don't know. These are all just guesses, but we'll say 1 in 1,000 again. Okay? Next prophecy. Zechariah 11:13. This is actually the following verse, so it's kind of an add-on to that last prophecy, which makes it even more rare. Then the Lord said to me, "Throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them." So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. Okay, so Jesus, whenever he was betrayed, Judas was paid 30 pieces of silver by the Pharisees. After the betrayal went down, Judas felt so bad because he betrayed an innocent man, and he went back to the temple, and he threw the 30 pieces on the ground, which is what this prophecy says, and he said, "I don't want your money. Take your money back. I've betrayed innocent blood." So then the Pharisees, they look at this money on the ground, and they can't just pick it up and put it in the offering basket because it's blood money, and it would taint the treasury of the temple. So they can't use blood money for that. I think that it's peculiar that the temple tax has blood money in the first place, but they don't have the ability to use it for temple funds. So what they did with it is they purchased a field to bury people in, right? Because tombs were expensive, and they wanted to be able to use this property to bury people. So the peculiar thing about this field is that it was specifically a potter's field. So 30 pieces of silver that were used to betray Jesus were then given to the potter to purchase this field. Prophecy fulfilled. So how many people over the past 2,000 years would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, and then that silver be used to purchase something from a potter? Okay, I'm just going to say, I think that one's pretty rare. So we'll say 1 in 100,000. I mean, that's still generous. Wouldn't you say? I would say. Let's look at the next one. Zechariah 13:7. "Awake, O sword, against my shepherd, against the man who stands next to me, declares the Lord of hosts. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. I will turn my hand against the little ones." Okay, strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. Who's the shepherd? Jesus. Who's the sheep? Disciples. We know that Jesus, whenever he was taken, he was being stricken, the disciples scattered. Okay? So what are the chances of somebody who has disciples, followers, scatter and forsake him whenever he is in a moment of accusation and being accused and eventually put to death? I have no idea, but I'm going to say 1 in 100,000 because that's generous enough. So, forsaken. Everybody following? All right, we got, so you can see the finish line. Isaiah 53:7. "He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before it shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth." We know this one's talking about Jesus too, right? I mean, these are all talking about Jesus, because Jesus, even though he was accused of a capital offense, a capital crime, he didn't give a defense for himself. He didn't try to protect himself. He kept silent. So how many people over the past 2,000 years can we say has committed a capital or has been accused of a capital crime, even though they were innocent, and then didn't give a defense for themselves? I'd say probably not many, but we could maybe find some. So we'll just say, again, 1 in 1,000, just to keep it super generous. All right, Isaiah 53:9. "And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth." Okay, so this is a prophecy about dying with the wicked. Okay, Jesus was crucified, but he wasn't crucified alone. He had 2 people on either side, and what were they accused of? Thievery and murder. They were thieves and murderers, right? But then whenever he was buried, a rich man paid for his tomb. He moved into the tomb that he had, and there was lots of fine incenses and linens and whatnot. So died with the wicked, yet buried with the rich. Okay, this is another fulfillment. I'm not even going to try to begin to try to determine what the odds of that would be, because that's just super specific. But again, for generosity, we'll say 1 in 1,000. And finally, number 8, Psalm 22:16. For dogs encompass me, a company of evildoers encircles me. They have pierced my hands and feet. They've pierced my hands and feet. The thing that is most interesting about this is that David penned this 700 years or so before crucifixion was even invented. And yet he's talking specifically about piercing hands and feet. So that's just cool in itself. That's just a little tidbit there. But we know this is talking about crucifixion. So over the past, 2,000 years, what is the chances, what are the odds of somebody being crucified and having their hands and feet pierced? I'm going to say 1 in 10,000. So these are 8 prophecies that we've looked at and determined that these are the odds of each one of these. So let's talk about probabilities for a second. If we wanted to figure out, say there was 100 people in this room, 60 were men, 40 were women, and we were to have somebody come in blindfolded, and everybody's mixed around uniformly, and the blindfolded person was going to walk up, and what are the chances that they would shake a woman's hand? 40%, right? Because you got 40 women, 60 men, you have a 40% chance. Now, let's say the same number of people, 40% are left-handed. 40 of them are left-handed, 60 of them are right-handed. The chances of somebody coming in and finding somebody that is left-handed, again, 40%. In first service, I said the chances of them coming in and finding someone that has a left hand. And somebody said 100%. Unless, it's like a pirate or something. So 40% left-handed, 40% women. Let's imagine this same scenario, but now somebody comes in, and what are the odds, what is the probability of that person finding a left-handed woman? You got to multiply these together. So you're left-handed and woman, 40 and 40%. This gives you 16% for a left-handed woman. This is what you call a composite probability. Okay? So this is one probability, this is two, but in order to mix them together and find the odds of both things happening at the same time, you multiply them together. So you see how that works? Now, we need to do that with this list here, because we're trying to find somebody, not who the chances of somebody fulfilling this prophecy and then the chances of fulfilling this one and this one, but all of these together simultaneously. That's what we're looking for. So in order to do that, now that we made it all zeros, that's easy to multiply. So somebody just figure that out for me real quick. I'm just kidding. That would be really amazing, actually. So if we were to multiply all of these together, we would come to 1 in 10 to the 17th power. That is a terrible 7. 1 in 10 to the 17th. That means 10 with 17 zeros behind it, right? 2 zeros, 3 zeros, 17 zeros. It's a big number. So if we were going to use the same illustration, I didn't bring enough pennies to do this one, but we would need a bigger bucket, right? A bigger container. In fact, we would need a container that is the size of Texas, 2 feet deep, filled with pennies. And you take 1 penny, write an X on it, and then whenever you're on your cross-country stroll through Texas, you just drop it somewhere, and then somehow you shuffle them all up and make sure they're all mixed in uniformly so that it could happen, it's kind of random. And then You're flying in a helicopter. You're going all over Texas, and then you just stop and parachute out, land down, pick up a penny. The chances of that penny being the X penny is 1 in 10 to the 17th. Pretty slim chances that you're going to get that penny. I mean, so far, nobody's gotten a penny today, and we've had 2 services, so 4 opportunities to get the right penny. But that's just for 8 prophecies. You know, that's the probability of one person fulfilling 8 prophecies. We have over 300 messianic prophecies in the Old Testament that Jesus has fulfilled. So that's crazy. But let's take it up a notch. Let's add another 8. And we're not going to go through them and read them all, so relax. We're going to just say that they are the same, they're not, these are the simple ones. So, you know, they get kind of more complicated and more rare, but let's look at it as if nothing changed, you know, same probabilities, and let's just add another 8. So what we need to do is we need to take our number here and multiply it, and what we come up with is before this number here, we divided to get this number from 10 to the 28th. So we need to take 10 to the 28th times 10 to the 28th, and that gives us 10 to the 56. And then we need to divide that by the total population over the past 2,000 years, which is, we'll say, 100 billion, which would be 10 to the 11th. And then I should have done this over here, but I wanted to save time because I thought that was insignificant, but then whenever I skipped it, I actually needed to do it before. So there you go. There's my add-in commentary. Divide that by 10 to the 11, then you come up with 10 to the 45th power. That'd be 10 with 45 zeros. Okay, so now our Texas bucket is not going to be big enough anymore. In fact, if we were to have a bucket the size of the earth, that would not be big enough. What we would need is, let's just look at the earth here. We've got the earth. Pretty good. You can tell what that is? That's the sun, that's right. If we were to have a bucket or a ball of pennies that would be big enough for this probability to work, we would need a ball that is as big as the distance between the earth and the sun times 60. 60 times bigger than the distance from the earth to the sun. We would need a ball of pennies that big. Do you know how big that is? It's huge. It's 5,577,600,000 miles in diameter. That's a big number. I'm going to write it because I've never written a number that big. 5,577,600,000 miles in diameter from this point to this point. We need a ball that big full of pennies. And then you just take one of them, and then you put an X on it, and then you toss it back in, shake the whole thing up. Pretty simple process. Reach in, grab you a penny. The chances of that penny having the X on it would be 1 in 10 to the 45th power. That is super unlikely. And that's to fulfill 16 of the prophecies in the Old Testament. We have over 300. So, needless to say, your chances are not good of one person fulfilling the prophecies in the Old Testament concerning Messiah. In fact, you have no chances. It's zero. It's not going to happen unless it was planned beforehand. Unless something outside of time was able to arrange the circumstances in time to produce this reality. And that's what happened. That's how it worked. So all this is super cool, but when you think about God, plugging all the numbers before anybody was even a thought, then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can get that for sure. But see, here's the thing: it's not just the probability. It's God actively being a part of His creation from the very beginning. Like from the very beginning, we have a glimpse that God is going to. He has a plan of redemption for His world, right? For His earth, for His creation. God gave authority, gave dominion to Adam and Eve over the world, over the earth. He said, everything you see is yours, go and subdue the earth. But He forfeited that. He forfeited that right whenever he gave over to Satan's temptation. But in Genesis 3, whenever you see this curse with the serpent is the one who deceived Adam and Eve, and God says, you know what? There will be a seed of the woman, and she will have enmity with the seed of the serpent. The serpent will bruise his heel, but he will crush your head. You guys remember that prophecy? The seed of the woman, that's the first messianic title that we see in the whole Bible. And so Satan, from Genesis 3, knows that there's going to be God's plan of redemption carried out through this seed of the woman, okay? So we know that Satan knows that the seed is going to come from humans, okay? That's our first distinction. It's not going to come from cattle. It's not going to come from, dogs. It's not going to come from platypus. It's going to come from person, human, right? So he focuses his energy on humans. He wants to wipe out this seed because if he can wipe out the seed, then he can wipe out God's plan of redemption. So then Satan just fills the earth with evil, so much to the point that God has to wipe out the entire earth with a flood, right? And he wipes out everything except for Noah and his family. So Noah he's rescued from that situation. And so Satan focuses his attack now on this line, the line of Noah. Well, we move into Genesis 15, and Abraham is revealed to be the father of this nation called Israel, right? And this line of the seed is going to move through Israel. It's going to move through the nation of Israel. So now Satan knows, okay, it's a person. It's of the humankind. It's going to be through the nation of Israel. He's getting more specific, right? In Genesis 49, we find out that, okay, it's not just a nation. It's a certain tribe. It's a specific tribe of this nation, and that is the tribe of Judah. First service was a little louder on their responses. That's okay. So we have a specific tribe within the nation of Israel, and that is Judah. So now we move forward into Exodus, and we see that the Israelites are in bondage. They're in captivity to the Egyptians, right, for 400 years. And Pharaoh sees that, you know what, these Hebrews, they're just multiplying like flies. We need to start cutting out the numbers. So they start killing off the baby boys, the Jewish boys. And this is an attack from Satan to try and kill off the line of the seed here, right? But then they rise up Moses. Good. And so Moses then carries them through the Exodus. And you can carry this, line. So you've got a tribe, or you've got a species, you've got a nation, you've got a tribe, and it moves into even a family in 2 Samuel 7, whenever God makes a covenant with David saying that the throne will never depart from your family. The line of David will be forever and ever. And so he's saying that there's going to be a specific family that this seed's going to come from. And so now Satan focuses all his energy on the line of David. And you can move through the Old Testament and see this line, and it kind of ties everything together. But even when you get into the New Testament, you see it happening still, right? Whenever King Herod discovers that the coming Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem, then he kills all the baby boys 2 and under in Bethlehem to try. And this is Satan's attack again, trying to wipe out the seed. But Jesus escapes. And then, even in Luke 4, now that it's narrowed down to a specific city that this person's going to be born in a time, now it comes to Jesus, and Satan's like, okay, I've narrowed it down. This is the man. This is the guy right here. So there's multiple attempts on Jesus' life. Right? In Luke 4, the villagers, they attempt to throw him off a cliff. All right? This is an attack from Satan to try and kill the Messiah. He tries to tempt him, get him off path in the desert in his temptation and his wilderness experience. Mark 4 and Luke 8, you've got two different storms on the Sea of Galilee that try to drown him, except he can walk on water, so it's, kind of backfired. And then ultimately, Satan planned for the cross to be the final thing. The final, whenever Jesus breathed his last, Satan thought, oh, I did it. Finally, we got him. I turned Israel against him. I got everybody involved, and Jesus has been executed. I won. You want to talk about backfire? Satan tried to use the cross to eliminate the line of the seed so that he couldn't provide redemption for the world. But then the cross is the thing that God used to redeem the world. Golly. It doesn't get any better than that. So why go through all this? Why talk about all this? Because all this points to one thing, and that is that Jesus is absolutely who he says he was. God. Jesus is God incarnate. God the Creator entered his creation in the form of a man and walked this earth, the same one that we do. He walked and he talked and he ate and he slept. God in the flesh. And then not only did he live among us, but he gave himself on a cross. He gave his life, sacrificed, so that we could have life in him. And the fact that Jesus is who he says he was makes the last 24 hours of his life important. It makes every hour of his life important. It makes every hour of our lives important. Because if we truly believe that Jesus is who he says he was, then that has to have a significant impact on the way that we live our lives. It has to have a significant impact on the decisions we make, on the words we speak, on the actions of our days. Like it's got to infiltrate us. It's got to permeate our being. Like we can't just know that Jesus is God and we have his life's account in here and then just be flippant about that. Because that indicates one of two things. Either one, you don't really believe that he is who he says he was, or you just don't care. So I would challenge you that somebody who can fulfill all of these prophecies, who from the very beginning of everything, was planned to go through this experience and these prophecies and all the way through the Bible, this story, to redeem us to God. Like, Jesus is God, but Jesus is also the only reason that we can know God. And so that has to have an impact on us. That has to have an impact on the way that we serve, on the decisions that we make. And that's my prayer. That's my hope for all of us, because Jesus is, like, he's everything, like he is God. Jesus is not a Sunday school story, and he's not he's not just a good teacher. I like what C.S. Lewis said. This will be a paraphrase because he's a much better orator and writer than I could speak, but he says that Jesus didn't leave that option available for us. He can't just be a good moral teacher. He's either a liar and a demon, or he's a lunatic. Just like a man who calls himself a poached egg is a lunatic. He's either a liar, or he's a lunatic, or he is Lord. And we have to fall at his feet and worship him, because that's the only options that we have there. So there is no, he's just a good teacher and I want to follow what he says. Jesus is Lord, and that means Lord of your life. That means, you know what? I'm not the one driving anymore. And that's a big decision to make. That's a big commitment. But it's the most important one that you'll make ever in your life, and it has the biggest consequences and outcomes of any other one. So I just want to tell you guys all this because one thing that we can walk away with absolute certainty is Jesus is God, and he is who he says he was, and God is in control of every aspect of existence. because we're not in control of our lives. We're not in control of what's going to happen tomorrow or what's going to happen after service. We're not in control, but God is in control, so much in control that he can make, the odds of God being able to orchestrate all this are, yes, they're easy. They're, 100%. God can and God does, clearly. So that's all that I wanted to share with you guys this morning. I hope that it was informational and not too informational. So let's just pray together, and then we'll get out of here.
Hi, I'm Kyle Lawless, worship pastor here at the Refuge Church. I'm so glad that you're here today watching this message. If you feel like it's impacted you in any way, please email our pastor at pastortony@therefuge.cc. Also, if you feel led to give to this ministry so that we can continue to give you videos like this online, we ask that you log on to therefuge.cc and find the icon that says Give. We're a community following Jesus and actively seeking to be more like